Hi everybody, welcome to Missy's Imaginings. I don't have an actual sewing video, but I do have some sewing tips and tricks in this video. I had been thinking for quite a while on making a ball gown, and I really love the beautiful blue gown in the live action Disney Cinderella. It's the iconic blue gown. There is so much fabric, but I love the way that it's just such the princess style, the big huge ball gown skirt. And I thought, okay, I want to make that. But when you're working on a small scale for dolls, when you deal with that much fabric, especially if you have to gather something, you end up with so much bulk compared to the size of the doll. So I have literally been laying in bed for weeks thinking, how do I want to do this? And I had seen this fabric in Joann. I think it was in like the back section. See, it's been so long. I've been planning this and I don't even remember, but I think this fabric was like back in the red tag section. And even in the red tag section, it was so expensive, but I couldn't walk away from it. And it's an ombre embroidery lace. So obviously you can see my hand here. So it is embroidered on that kind of a meshy stuff. And it went from blue, well, it went from like the magenta color and then faded down through purple and then into blue with some purple, and it has little sequins on it. And the end, actually, it kind of fades out and tapers. So I knew I wanted to make a ball gown, but because of the design of the lace, I had to lay the pieces kind of funny. But I think overall, I was able to get the same ombre effect. So we just had the magenta at the back, and then it goes through the purple to the front on both sides. So I was happy with how I could actually lay out the pieces, because there wasn't that much left on the bolt. And so I didn't get very much of it, but there was enough. So I knew that this fabric had to be a ball gown, but I knew I wanted this shape. I wanted it to come out, but I didn't want all that gathered fabric around the waist of my doll. But I wanted it full, and I didn't want to deal with hoops. That's not what I wanted. So I thought, okay, well, let's go with like an A-line, but I do want some gathering and fullness. So here's kind of the tips and tricks that I used when I was designing the skirt. I just have one basic pattern piece. So that's here, and as you can see, there's lines. We're going to go over what those are for. But when I made the pattern, it's not a full quarter circle. I mean, well, it's close. So it's almost a quarter circle. And what I did is, when I added a seam allowance on the side, because I knew I would have panels rather than cutting a full circle of fabric, because I didn't have enough fabric to cut a full circle. It wasn't a big enough piece. So, and it wouldn't lay correctly. Like if you have this beautiful ombre and you put a big circle on it, you're not going to be able to direct as well where that ombre goes and the direction of how it lays, because one is going to lay from the hem to the waist and then the waist to the hem. So I knew that wouldn't work. So by going with panels, you can better direct the direction of your print, whether it's an embroidery, well, the other gals over on the shelf, we'll put a picture here, whether it's, you know, this embroidered fabric, whatever you're using. If you go with a panel option, you have a better control over how that design is going to look once it's on your garment. So you can have, you know where the waist is going to be, and you know how the pattern is going to go down the length of your skirt. So we went with a panel, and there is, I think, roughly a centimeter, a seam allowance. But when I went to make the roundness, you can have a pivot point and do a string, or have a long ruler. Let's grab a long ruler here. And have a pivot point and mark your edges like this. But I just fold my fabric, or fold my paper. So I fold it in half, and then I know the seam allowance is along the edge, so when I fold it up again, I only fold to the sewing line, because none of this edge is going to be part of a seam allowance. And then I can fold it again, and then I can make my markings from a very designated point that isn't going to change that much. And then I just unfold it and trace, and then unfold it and trace, and then unfold it, and then I have my curved lines that fall into place a little bit easier. That's kind of what I did. Well, not kind of, that's what I did. So once I had my pattern piece, the other thing to keep in mind, and here again, I had to work with what I had because I didn't have as much of this fabric as I had wished, but this first piece is your underskirt. And then the next piece is an overskirt. And the third piece is your lace overlay. So this dress actually has 3 skirts. And we're going to look at them in a minute. But so when you're cutting your fabric, make sure, because of the way this falls, that on your outer skirt and your overlay, if you have enough fabric, you want to continually make those longer. Add like an inch to the length when you cut it out. And so instead of cutting on the line, just cut an extra inch of length, because as it falls over everything underneath, it's going to take up more of that length because it's extending out over, and you want the hem to still come down. I wasn't able to do it as much as I wanted just because this fabric was it was very limited. And I had to be able to fit the pieces on my selvage of fabric. So the next thing we'll talk about, so you cut your pieces, your outer skirts are longer than this one. Also, this has like a full centimeter hem, where the outer skirts are just serged along the bottom, or if you want to zigzag, turn it up only enough to cover the serging or the zigzag and hem it. So it's a very narrow hem on the outside layers. That helps give some more extra length. Okay, now let's look at these lines. I wanted this skirt to be full. I wanted it to come out. I didn't want it to hang straight down. And so this is what we did. On the underskirt, should we just do the reveal? Let's just do that. All right, so let's see. And hopefully it's not looking too messy because she has been jostled around a bit. Oh my goodness. All right, Hua, here we go. Let's see if we can put her arms up and her skirt. So we're gonna unveil the underskirt here. Okay, so what we've done together, all of us together, is there are 2 layers or rows of gathered tulle. So the first layer is from the bottom line to the hem. So here we go, here's the bottom line. So that's gonna be gathered and sewn on. Once that's in place, then the next layer of tulle comes higher up, this line here. It also extends all the way to the hem. So what we're doing is we're building more volume at the bottom of the skirt while minimizing the volume at the waist. So that's kind of what I did to have all the volume on the bottom. So then this, of course, will fold out around it, and then your overskirt goes like this. There we go. And that builds all that fullness. But that way, it's not using as much fabric because you're not covering the entire length of the skirt with all these layers. And the only thing I actually have gathered at the top, at the waist, are the smaller amounts of fabric at the waistline because of the cut of my panel. I don't have a full rectangle to gather. I only have this much to actually go around her waist. And it's only the 3 layers of fabric that consist of the underskirt, the overskirt, and then the lace overlay. So there are still 3 layers of fabric, and because of what I had on hand, oh, sorry dear, put her arms down now. Because of what I had on hand, the underskirt probably isn't what I would have normally chose, but I thought it's not going to show anyway, and so it's a light lavender, so the color scheme is okay. The tulle was a burgundy that I just had a bunch of, and I thought, well, that works okay with the wine color of the skirt, and so that way if a little bit pokes out, it's still not going to clash too much, but I do have a little bit poking out just because I didn't have enough to cover the full length with my overskirts. I was working with some selvages, and I probably should have waited, until I had time to buy proper fabric so that this wouldn't be wasted, but I'm still happy. Okay, so that's the skirt, and I didn't show the sewing because it's just sewing hours and hours of straight lines. So, well, and these are slightly curved, but you're serging the hem, and you're sewing the hem, which ends up being, Oh, the other thing, when you're making the skirt, the underskirt and the overskirt are 4 of these pieces. So it's almost a full circle. I think there was a little bit of a gap when I had it laid on the table. It's not quite a full circle. But then when I cut the lace overlay, I actually cut 5 pieces. So there is more fabric of the lace overlay than the underskirt. The reason being, of course, I wanted it very full, and I wanted to maximize the usage of this beautiful fabric. But in a technical aspect, if you have these exactly match, it's very easy for this to get caught into the folds of the overskirt, and then it doesn't show as much. But when you have more fabric on the outside, it lays on the outside a little bit more, and so it stays where you want it. The other thing is I gather this separately from the underskirts. I don't gather them all on one band. I gather them separately, lay them on top of each other to make sure they match the width of my bodice, and then I sew them together. So they're gathered separately, which also helps keep this on top of your overskirt so that it's not getting lost in the folds, because there's a lot of fabric in this lace overlay. So there we go, and you can kind of jostle it depending on what color you want to display. Isn't that beautiful? I just love it. So that's another little technical trick, is gather them separately, because then it doesn't get caught in those gathering folds, and then keep laying inside the folds so that you can't swish it the way you want, because I wanted it to swish just like in Cinderella. I wanted that swishableness to the skirt. Okay, so now that's kind of how I tackled the skirt. Now we'll go over the 2 major mistakes I made on the bodice. I will say sometimes, whether it's artwork or sewing or crafting, one of the biggest skills you will ever develop is learning to make your mistakes look like you did it on purpose. So when I cut out the bodice, I knew I wanted the pieced bustier bodice, and so I cut out all my pieces and I got them put together. And as I was getting ready to I'd actually put it on the dress because it was dim in here and I didn't have all my lights on. And went to fit it on the doll and get it on so I could take pictures. And I thought, what is wrong with this bodice? And the first major thing that I did is I totally spaced when I was making the pieces, and I did not add extra on the center back edges for an overlap for closure. So yeah, so that was the first major mistake. I thought, why is this not fitting her? I've made 2 of these and they fit fine. And then it dawned on me, oh, I just used my basic pieces and cut them out. That's why. So be sure you add your seam allowance. Oh my goodness. Add your seam allowance, because that extra little 1/4 of an inch on each side so that you can overlap and put your snaps is huge when you go to finish and put it on the doll. So that's why you'll see there's an opening at the back. So instead of a snap closure, I actually did it's a fairly large hook and band that hooks on so that it brings the fabric together, but it doesn't overlap, so that way it could fit on her. And then up here at the top, partly because of my other mistake and partly because I didn't do that, it wouldn't go around, so I put just a ribbon tie. But I mean, it looks okay. You make it look like you planned it. And then the ruching on the front, I don't know if it'll show. There was no ruching on the front. After I got it on and I was putting it on her, I thought, why does this look so strange? And I discovered that on this side, which I thought they were both the same, so it wouldn't matter, but on this side, these 4 pieces, I actually attached them upside down. So there was all this fullness for the bust down here underneath the bust. I was like, what? So yeah, so I had to take in, you grab your needle and your thread and you do what you can do. So we did a side to side and pull up and gather, side to side, pull up and gather. So it kind of brings the neckline down a little bit more than I wanted, but it adds the ruching and it uses up all that extra fabric because it was too big right there. Oh my goodness. I don't know how I managed that, but when I got to looking at it clear as day, these seams are supposed to be narrow here and then get wider for the bust, for the fullness of the bust, but they went smaller. So I thought, oh, that's upside down. So I don't know. I may end up taking it apart and doing it again. My only concern is this is all the fabric I have left. There are 2 pieces here, but I would need to be able to get, I might be able to do it if I could get all the pieces on here and then line it with, you know, black or something, rather, because right now it's lined with the same fabric on both sides. The front and the lining is the same. So I don't know. I may end up taking that apart. The other thing that I still am debating, and I haven't done it because I don't know if I'm going to keep this bodice. You can let me know in the comments what you think. But here is the remainder of that beautiful lace, and see how it kind of, let's see, oh, I'll put it over here. How those ends trickle down. And so this would have been the hem of the garment. So if you're buying the lace and you gather all the way at the top for a people pattern, let's see, I'll clip so it'll hold still here. Then these beautiful appliques would trickle down towards the hem, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And so these pieces are were going to be used for, you know, the beautiful ruching that comes across and around her shoulders, over the bust, and then to the back. And I may even was thinking of taking some of the applique, like from one side up across the bust or the torso here. But I haven't cut any of this yet. Sorry, I got attacked by a clip. So I haven't cut any of these out because I'm not sure how I would do that, but I was wanting to have this, you know, coming across for that beautiful ruching, and there might be enough that the way it lays would be fine across the top. But I haven't done it because I don't know yet if I'm going to keep this bodice, because it is kind of a bear to get it to fit her. I know it would fit any of my other dolls, but she's a lot fuller than they are. So, all in all, that is how I reason my way through my ideas and mistakes. So, I thought I would just give out those hints if you're wanting a gown with this shape, just on some of the little tricks and ways that you can get it to look the way you want without having all that huge bulk at the waist. And it was very easy to connect it to the bodice, and then you just turn your bodice under on the inside and stitch it in, and yeah, it doesn't add all that bulk there where you don't want it. So that's how I did the ball gown. I will go ahead and I don't know if this really even needs to be a pattern. When you're measuring, what I did on this doll is I went from where I knew the skirt, where I wanted it to fit to the bodice, and I came down, and always plan when you're measuring length as if your doll has her high heel shoes on, or has her, extended shoes or clunky, whatever shoes that you know they want to wear. Use that as you're planning your length. Now, she was a little bit easier because she's already in a high-heeled foot position, so it already raises her up. So I took this down to the length where I wanted it, and of course the underskirt falls, because it's on the bottom layer, it falls closer to the actual hem that I wanted. And but the overskirts, like I say, I was just battling with the amount of fabric I had to work with. But plan that, so from the waist down to all the way to the floor if she had her shoes on. And with a ball gown, you can always make it a little bit longer. It's still going to look good. And then that will be what you plan for the finished length from the seam line to the seam line. And then remember to add your seam allowances. So, and then when I measured her waist, I roughly divide it by 4 because I knew I was going to have 4 pieces. And then this curvature, I come from the corner and I bring my measuring tape. So I decide, okay, because I know there are going to be some gathers. So her waist was 18.5 centimeters, so I can round up to 19 because I know there'll be gathers, but 19 doesn't divide by 4 easily, so I go to 20, divided by 4 is 5. So I know I've got a 5 centimeter curve that I have to have, and then if it's a little bit more, I know I'm just going to gather that. So I come from the corner with what I know is my minimum until that will fit into where the actual seam line is, not just the paper, because I've got seam allowance. And then that's where I draw my waistline. And like I say, I made this one a little bit bigger because I knew I would gather a little bit. And so I come down until I get right where I can fit exactly what I want for a quarter of her waist. And then I draw it in. Then I measure from that point to my length. So that's how you can determine what this should be as far as where it comes from the corner of the paper down. Let's see. I think that's all. If you want this just to be a skirt, you'll just have to cut a rectangle length enough to do a waistband on your doll and have it cut so that you know it's what you want. Then gather the skirt edge to match that length of your waistband in case you want the bodice actually separate. Okay, so I think that's everything. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I say, I didn't want to sew on this one because it's just straight line after straight line after straight line, then all of these long rectangles of tulle that I sewed them together because I had to cut them in pieces, and then you fold it and gather and gather and gather, and it's very tedious and boring. But this way you at least had a look at it, so if you know how to do any ruffles, then there you go. If you're a brand new sewer, I will add this last little tidbit on gathering. You want to go along the edge with a very long stitch called a basting stitch. Because this is tulle, which you can slide thread through very easily, on my machine, my normal stitch length is like 2.2 for doll things, and I went to a 4.0 to gather. And then I sew 2 lines, because that way if one of your threads breaks while you're gathering, you're not going to lose all that gathering. It's just not going to be quite as pretty. But 2 lines of stitching, then you take, don't back tack ever, then you take the top 2 threads and just pull them and gather that fabric on those threads. And when you have 2 lines of stitching, it helps the seam allowance to lay a little bit flatter, so that you can sew it in a little bit easier. If you only have 1 row of stitching, first off, that row of thread can break and then you lose it all. But it also will have a real ruffled seam allowance, which sometimes doesn't want to lay very nice when you're sewing it in. So I always do 2 layers, 2 rows of thread for gathering. Then I laid it out on a big table and placed it and adjusted my gathers to fit the curve the way I wanted when it was laid out on the table. And I did the bottom row first, because if you do the top row, then you've got to get all that out of the way to do the bottom. So do the bottom one first, then you overlay this one, which is going to overlay on the top, and then sew it on there. Pin it on and sew. Okay, so I think that's everything. Feel free to ask me any questions if I forgot something that's important, and I'll be happy to answer those questions in the comments. But anyway, I hope you have fun sewing, and like I say, it's basically this. The bustier pieces are already on the website in her basic set, so that's just what I picked. But remember to add for your back closure. Save yourself some headaches. Okay, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.